Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar, Using Assessments to Foster Agency, Identity, and Learning. We're so excited to have you all here, and we know that assessment and the topic of assessment is a very timely topic, and so we're just excited to engage with you all around this topic tonight. I'm going to go ahead and start. My name is Jenny Beltramini. I'm a math specialist at Student Achievement Partners, and I'm joined by my colleague Lisa Goldschmidt, who is helping to run the show behind the scenes tonight, and we'll be answering some of your questions that you put in the question tab this evening. And we are super honored to be joined by a star-powered team from Newport-Mesa Unified School District who is going to be spending most of the evening this evening talking with us. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. First, we'd love to hear how many Core Advocate webinars you've attended from Student Achievement Partners. So if you want to take a minute and answer our poll, we'll give you a second to do that, and then we'll move forward. Great. So it looks like most of you, this is your first webinar with us tonight, so we hope you enjoy it and that you'll come back for more of our webinars after your experience this evening. But we have people who have attended 2 to 5, 6 to 10, and even at least one person or maybe a few people that have attended 20 or more webinars. So welcome to our folks who have been here a lot with us in webinars over the time since we've been doing them. If you may not know this, especially if this is your first webinar, but we have a national network of educators called the Core Advocate Network. And if you like the webinar and you appreciate learning opportunities such as this one, we would encourage you to go to Achieve the Core to sign up to be a member of our network, and then you'll get lots of, well, not a lot, but periodic notifications about other learning opportunities like this one. Also, if you want to learn more about us, you can contact me, Jenny Beltramini. My email is there. My colleague, Joy, also. And again, go ahead and take the survey to join, and you can visit our website and check out lots of other resources and tools that are available there to Achieve the Core. So we also love to do live interaction and engagement during the webinar. There's actually lots of ways to do that, but one way is through Twitter. So feel free to tweet during and after the webinar about this topic. We think it's a conversation that educators are really wanting to be in right now. So we would love to see your tweets and see what you think. And you can do at @achievethecore, which is our Twitter, and also myself. My Twitter handle is there. And then all of our guests tonight, Jody and the rest of the team from Newport-Mesa, you can feel free to @ any of us in your tweets, and we would appreciate it. Also, other ways to engage with us during the webinar, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your panel, and that's really for the presenters to ask us questions or ask the presenters questions or get tech help if you need it. And so feel free to use that to ask us directly questions. There's also a resources tab with some links to resources that will be referenced throughout the webinar. And then the group chat, I see lots of people are already in it, and this is just really the way to engage with one another throughout the webinar. So feel free. I'll also be monitoring it, so if you have questions, you can put them in there for me as well. But feel free to engage with one another and chat throughout the webinar and make connections with other participants. And then the certificate button, you'll have access to the recording afterwards, and you'll have access to a certificate for your time in this webinar from that button. So the certificate, how that's provided, it's available in the certificate box to the right. You can just click the blue ribbon icon to print or download the certificate at the end of the webinar. So in order to get that certificate, you'll need to stay with us for at least 75 minutes. And then once that happens, that certificate will be available for you from that button. So let's dig right into the content. We have so much to get through tonight, and we're really excited to just spend all of our time with this great team from Newport-Mesa School District. So the team is going to help you understand assessment as part of the daily work of teaching, explore affordances of an asset lens of assessment, and consider the role of assessment in rehumanizing teaching and learning, and develop lenses to examine your current assessment systems. And so we'll be going through all of those goals over the next 90 minutes with you. So I'm going to go ahead and start by kicking it off to John Drake. He is the Chief Academic Officer of Newport-Mesa Unified School District, and John's going to begin the presentation for us.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you all participants for being here. It really is, an honor to be able to share our learning with you while at the same time learning alongside as we go through and think through the experiences we've had in really rehumanizing our approach to assessment, or at least beginning to rehumanize it. And so part of the lens that we are looking through as we focus on improvement and learning is the lens of questioning our current systems. And assessments, as you all know, has a lot of questions that need answering from a systems perspective. These two questions have been driving our work around humanizing assessment. How can assessment positively support student agency, identity, and learning? And how can it be harmful and dehumanizing? And the second question being, are we using it as a tool to identify gaps in student learning, or to recognize what students know and understand about critical grade level content? So I think it's important to you also to have really the context of our story. And so I want to spend the next 10, 12 minutes sharing with you, the story behind some of our thinking and learning these days. And it's important to understand Newport-Mesa demographics a little bit. Newport-Mesa Unified School District is a unified school district in Southern California, and it spans across two cities, Newport Beach, California, and Costa Mesa, California. We have about 19,000, it's actually pre-K through 12th grade students in our district, and the socioeconomics really are at both ends of the spectrum. And so it's a diverse, challenging population with a pretty large, significant EL Hispanic population. We've got 22 elementary schools and 12 secondary schools, 2 of those schools being alternative schools, and 1,100 teachers, about 1,100 teachers, 600 of whom are elementary staff. And so having shared some of the numbers of demographics about Newport-Mesa, I also think it's important to recognize some other characteristics of our districts when it comes to teaching and learning. We are a district that has an amazing group of teachers in our classrooms who are committed to kids and families, and they are also committed to teaching content often as it's presented in the instructional materials that we adopt for core instruction. And currently, our systems are set up to support this. The results we're getting from our systems of instructional compliance, for lack of a better term, are the results we've been getting probably for many years, and maybe even stretch back to when I was in high school at one of the Newport-Mesa high schools. So we've begun examining our system to see if there's a better way to teach children to love to learn and learn to learn. And for our conversation today, I'd like to situate it in K-5 mathematics and our approaches there. And as I've shared, even in mathematics, we rely on published instructional materials to provide instructional decisions sometimes for us as to what needs to be taught next. We also have committed for years in this district to a response to intervention system that assesses to identify and diagnose gaps students have, and then we fill those gaps with reteaching or small group targeted instruction. So when we think about assessment, oftentimes it's about diagnosing what is wrong with our students and fixing them, as opposed to identifying and understanding what students know and building learning on top of that. About 4 years ago, we adopted new kinder through fifth grade math materials that provided us the promise of being aligned to our Common Core state standards and supported teachers to teach in ways that would get at the rigor of our standards. And after the first year of using the materials, we were asked to begin to provide data that showed how our kids and teachers were doing with these materials. What indicators did we have that students were meeting grade level expectations? And as you see here on the slide, our assessment calendar was born. And the assessment calendar also served as a pacing guide for our teachers and students. Teachers were required to give end-of-unit assessments within windows and time as a way to monitor student and teacher progress. So from our use of these curricular-based assessments, you can see we were somewhat able to identify how kids were doing because we could identify how many 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s we had throughout the district and classrooms. We were able to sort kids to fix gaps they had without really understanding what they do know as a foundation to build on. And yet we would still move on to the next unit in our materials and try to fill those gaps for students. Some big questions began to surface here for us in relation to our systems, in relation to supporting math achievement. And we began to ask them. We asked, why exactly are we looking for gaps? How are we positioning teachers and students when we focus on gaps? We began to wonder what message this sends to kids when they're positioned as a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. How is our assessment system contributing to how kids are positioned socially and emotionally in our classrooms? We asked, are we positioning all students as competent mathematicians and sense makers, or only some positioned that way while others are positioned as needing help? We asked what would happen if we focused and identified what they do know about the mathematics. And finally, are they numbers or human beings? We also used results from our publisher assessments, as you can see from this graphic, to see how our teachers were doing using data like this. Each bar represents an individual school and how, for this example, their kindergartners performed on a unit test. And again, we began to ask questions. Questions like, what does reducing the hard work of teaching to a percentage do to the identity of a teacher? Do these graphs actually represent mathematical knowledge and learning? Or is this a reflection of the teacher teaching or not teaching the way the content is laid out in the textbook? Is this really a reflection of student learning and teacher effectiveness if no matter what happens, we're going to move on to the next page in the book? These were all questions we began using to drive our questioning of our systems. And we continue to grapple with these questions that come from examining these systems while at the same time moving in this direction to humanize teaching and learning by understanding and focusing on what students do know, and then providing them the opportunity to build on their knowledge. We're also engaging in common experiences, as you'll hear from some of our teachers, in learning as professionals. We're moving away from sit and get professional development to professional learning, learning that exemplifies the values we hold and the vision we're trying to create. Teachers are seen as capable sense makers whose knowledge can continually expand when they're positioned as learners. So when we're developing, together we do math, read and discuss research, watch videos of students, look at student work together, and learn from the students in our classrooms. We're learning to teach and learn in ways that recognize and honor the assets and sense-making abilities that we all bring. To support this work, 3 years ago, we started re-envisioning instruction, with offering teachers an opportunity to learn together with a focus on building a vision for teaching and learning that is student-centered and focused on building identity, agency, and belonging. We wanted to move from teachers teaching a book to teaching students math. We started with offering teachers an opportunity to participate in cognitive guided instruction training, and we offered teachers the opportunity to extend that learning through participation in a Math Fellows program. We had over 130 teachers participate in cognitive guided instruction training, approximately 65 of whom also participated in the Fellows Extended Professional Learning. And we had participants from 20 of our 22 schools, and what it means to teach and learn began to shift for many of our participants. So as we began to think about this task of shifting the culture of learning, we knew we needed to create a learning system. A system where teachers would learn in cohorts over multiple years and would need the support of learning communities as they would be developing in ways that we knew would create tensions with current systems. In addition, we knew we'd need to work on all of the elements within this pyramid simultaneously in every professional learning opportunity offered. We had to be extremely and continue to have to be extremely intentional. We need to develop shared productive beliefs that all students have intuitive knowledge and can do grade level math, and that we as the educators are responsible for creating space and learning experiences for them to actively construct knowledge. We also need and continue to need to develop a professional vision of high quality math learning where students grapple with and make sense of ideas, where they explain their thinking and listen closely to the thinking of others in order to build their knowledge. And we needed to develop our own knowledge, content knowledge of the mathematics and the standards. We needed to collaboratively construct knowledge of pedagogy that supports noticing and responding to what students know and understand about the mathematics in a student-centered environment. We needed to build our knowledge about how students think and how their thinking and sense-making can be responded to instructionally and leveraged to support the learning for the community of learners in the classroom, including the learning of the teacher. We also ground our work in principles that you see on this slide, and we set up professional learning experiences that help us collectively define and understand what these principles mean and look like in action. When we think about all the different roles in our district and the different ways or opportunities that exist, we began to define these principles collectively. And as a result of this work, teachers began saying things about their practice that we hadn't heard before. Things like, I'm redefining what it means to teach, shifting from my thinking about math to their thinking about math. Not trying to teach math from a textbook, but looking at what students understand and building on that through students sharing and listening to each other. We also heard, I can build the knowledge of the entire class by leveraging the thinking that comes from students within the class. That's learning. I no longer teach particular methods or rules. This now comes from students and their curiosity. And to stay true to making sense of our core principles that we just shared, we also focused our efforts in supporting these practices of teaching that come out of the University of Washington and position kids with agency, identity, and belonging. And with this in mind, we've begun to look at assessments with a different lens. Not a lens to determine what's right or wrong with the student, but instead a lens to determine what each student knows about the mathematics that's put in front of them, and then respond to instructionally by providing opportunities for students to build on their understanding and move their learning forward. So that provides a bit of context for us. As I, here in a few minutes, we'll turn it over to some colleagues. But to wrap up this portion of learning together today, I'm going to ask you to take about 30 seconds to read the quote that you see on this slide. So we're doing everything we can, and I'm sure there's definitely more for us to do, but we're doing everything we can to focus and be intentional as we build professional experiences with the goal of developing a way of teaching and learning that's considered in this citation. So before I hand it over to Jody Garino, I'd like you to take a few minutes to reflect on what you've heard so far, and then use the chat to share with us what this quote leads you to think about. Jody, some people are asking if we can put the quote back. Can you go back one slide? So we are seeing some thoughts about student-centered classrooms, using children's thinking to support others' learning, moving children from where they are, not fixing them, and positioning students in ways that will impact positively their social emotional being. A lot about student-centered. Opportunities for students to show their thinking and their competence. So thank you for sharing. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jody Garino.
So I'm going to be talking about this question: how is assessing student understanding part of the work of teaching? So as we think about the core practices that John mentioned, assessing student understanding, we wanted to broaden how we think about assessment. So traditionally, assessment has been about giving a test, often at the end of a teaching period, maybe like the end of a chapter test, and then the results are used to sort kids into groups and reteach. So from a lens of trying to fix or repair kids and evaluate student performance, and then also as a place to place a grade on a report card. So within the work that John described, one of the things that we set out to do was shift the view of assessment to part of the work of teaching. So we're listening to and learning from kids all day, every day. And how do we use what we learn to provide intentional learning experiences for students? So experiences that are respectful of them, of the funds of knowledge they bring, and the assets that we can build upon. And it's quite a different lens or mindset than this whole idea of like fixing them. We also know there's a progression to this. So starting with the work on noticing and interpreting student thinking, how do we learn to notice the details of student work and make sense of and interpret what it is we see kids doing? And then we have to think about, well, how do I use that information? And sometimes we plan to use it and don't actually end up using it. Or we may plan to use what we learn to inform future lessons. So maybe what I'll do next year differently when I teach fractions as numbers. Or we'll know what to do tomorrow based on what we learned from students today. And ultimately, we're hoping to get to a place where we use what we're noticing, even in the moment, to make those snap decisions as we notice things right away. So keeping the goal in mind of humanizing math in students, we're going to take a look at an assessment task. And this came from the newly adopted instructional materials. And it comes from first grade in a unit that comes near the end of the year. So something students would be doing in springtime of first grade. And I'm going to pause for a moment to give you time to determine the numbers that go in the missing boxes. And you'll notice in the top right corner, you can see a key that can help you out with that. So I'll give you a few minutes to just think about what numbers go in those boxes. And you might ask yourself as a teacher, what would I know and understand about my students' thinking from this task? And how would I use this to shape my teaching? So here's the standard that the instructional materials identify that particular item to measure. So 1 NBT1, count to 120, starting at any number less than 120. And in this range, read and write numerals and represent a number of objects with a written numeral. So if students aren't sure how to make sense of that task, and I imagine some of you might have been like me on the first time I looked at that task going, I'm not really sure what goes in the box. Or perhaps they have the wrong number in the response squares. Does that seem like a reliable indicator that they don't know how to count to 120 from any given number? And what if they filled in the boxes with the correct number? Does that give us a false positive? Oh, they figured out how to work this, activity, and does that mean they actually know how to count to 120? So what you see from the right side of on the right side of the slide comes out of the Common Core number and base 10 progression document, which connects the counting sequence to place value. So if we think about this big shift in language around teen numbers, so if you think about 17, right, where we attend first to the ones, the 7 ones, and then 110, to that shift that begins with 20. That now the first part of the language of the numbers is the number of tens or decades to the ones. For example, 37, the 30 is about the tens, and then the 7 follows. And this is really an important development for young children, and we often hear this cadence as they count. And as they start to get close to decades, they often slow and there's a certain pause. So we're going to drop in and meet a student and get an idea of what counting might look like and sound like for a young child. So I'd like to introduce you to Christopher, and we're going to drop in on Christopher counting to 100. So he's being interviewed by a researcher. And my question as we watch is, what can we learn about Christopher from listening to him count? So I'm going to go ahead and start the video and just pay attention to what are the things you notice about his counting.
Could you count for us? Count as high as you can count. Start at 1.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49. What's next?
What do you think comes next?
40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 40, 5v2, 5v1, what's next again? What's it called again?
What did you call it? You said it really nicely.
5v.
Keep going.
5v1, 5v2, 5v3, 5v4, 5v5, 5v6, 5v7, 5v8, 5v9, 5v10, 5 is 60. 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, and 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 78, 79, 78, 70, 79, 70, 17, 70, 80, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, and 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100!
Wow, 100. Oh, such wonderful counting. Thank you, Christopher.
Now can I go out?
Yes, let's do it.
So there you see and hear Christopher counting, and you see some of that as he gets to the decade. He's kind of pausing, thinking, what goes next? When we hear the 48, 49, 5, 5D. So now let's revisit the assessment task and think about if this is an assessment item, we can make some assumptions that students are doing tasks like this within their everyday instruction. And I wonder, is spending time on this task teaching the standard, or is it teaching to the test? And how helpful is it for Christopher? And what does this mean for a teacher? Does a teacher feel pressured to teach this particular activity? Because if you don't teach this, will students have access to the item on the assessment? Or will they get to the assessment and feel defeated and like they're not good at math? So examples like the pine cone and acorn task that you just experienced led us to the need to revise both the assessment system that John mentioned and the actual assessments that would be put in front of students. So we started with the assessments from the adopted instructional materials and developed revised versions using the following design principles. So first of all, is the measure valid? We wanted to make sure that each item would assess the intent of the standard, and we wanted the assessment information to be able to guide instruction. So it was critical that the assessment tasks were actually aligned to the standards. We also wanted to make sure that the math is accessible to all students and that assessment tasks don't rely on a particular experience with a particular representation or activity, for example, with the pine cones and acorns. The third point there is critical grade level work, and we wanted to make sure to only assess the critical grade level work. So we wanted to support instruction, and knowing that 65 to 85% of instruction should be on the major work at the grade level, using the Student Achievement Partners focus documents, we wanted that present within the assessment too. And while this work originated well before COVID, it's especially critical now because teachers, I think we all acknowledge teachers are teaching with less time than ever before. And it's critical that every minute is used intentionally on the most critical work of each grade level. Our fourth design principle was that the assessments make student thinking visible to provide teachers with insight into student thinking that could then be leveraged and built upon. And we'll talk about this more throughout the presentation. And the last key here is an asset lens. As John mentioned before, moving from this idea of fixing or repairing kids or finding gaps, we really wanted to provide students with opportunities to show their understanding and to give teachers insight to leverage the assets and knowledge within their classroom learning community. So now Michelle is going to talk about these revised assessments and how this work has shifted her lens of assessment and how she uses assessment to guide instruction in her classroom.
Thank you, Jody. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here tonight. Glad you're with us. My question in this section is, how do you use assessments to guide your instruction? So we're now going to take a look at version 2, which is the revised assessment from version 1 that Jody introduced in the previous slide. The initial feeling a first grader gets when seeing version 1 is fear, intimidation, and lack of confidence. I've seen kids slouch down when given this assessment. But on the flip side, when a student sees version 2, they're facing a question with ease and confidence. This simplistic revision allows the teacher to target the most critical understanding in a non-intimidating format. In version 2, the revised assessment, we were intentional about starting at the number 87. When starting at the number 87, students will cross 3 decades, and more importantly, they cross 100. Most students in the beginning of first grade will write 1001 or 10,010 after the number 100. And as a result, the revised assessment allows teacher to gain a greater insight on whether or not students can extend the counting sequence and understand place value. So now I want you to take a moment and look at these two versions side by side. And I want you to do the first few problems in version 1. And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to maybe do a couple of those problems on the assessment. So maybe you notice that the assessment is asking for a circle around an add 10 fact or a double fact. So I want you to think about the problem 7 plus 6. This might be considered a doubles plus or minus 1 problem. And I've seen students add 6 plus 6 plus 1 to solve this. And I've also seen students add 7 plus 7 and subtract 1. Still others may see 6 as 3 plus 3, adding 3 to the 7 to get 10, and the other 3 to the 10 to get 13. Or perhaps decompose the 7 into a 3 and 4, and add the 4 to the 6 to get 10, and then 3 more to get 13. Well, I'm excited when I see students use flexible strategies that make sense to them. It's not about labeling a problem as a particular strategy. It's about solving the problem in a way that makes sense to them. And so personally, I would rather see kids making a 10 here that will help them later think about problems like 37 plus 6 or 37 plus 26. They're not going to use doubles for those. We're in a base 10 system, so building towards 10 is really important. And one of the things I really appreciate about these revised assessments as a teacher is that these assessments give me insight to my students' their thinking. I'm not assessing the instructional materials. I'm assessing their understandings. So it's not about the right answer or which strategy the instructional materials call out for a particular problem, but it's understanding what the students know. And now in this critical time, especially now with the limited time we have with our students during this pandemic, more than ever, I'm intentional with my teaching, and these assessments really allow me to build upon their mathematical understandings. So rather than circling an answer and writing a sum as it calls for in version 1, my students now solve these 3 problems in version 2. And not only did I see and understand what they did mathematically, I also see how they represented their thinking. And these students' examples are then shared in class after the assessment in order for me to leverage their representation during our mathematical discourse. Another really interesting revelation I discovered when giving these revised assessments, it happened when a new student, Daniel, joined my class in the middle of the school year. And he came to my class in January, and he wasn't in my class up until that point. so I wanted to assess his mathematical knowledge. I was able to pull out the version 2, the revised assessment, because this version only assesses the math and not the procedural strategies that you could see in version 1. So if I had given him version 1 instead, Daniel would most likely have done poorly since he wasn't taught the procedures that the instructional materials called the instructional materials addressed in version 1. So now I want you to meet Diane, Isabella, and Ayden. They are second graders, and these colors represent the data system in our district. The green indicates the student solved the problem correctly, red that the answer is incorrect. So now I want you to take a moment to think about these questions. What inferences might you make just based on these colors? How does this color coding system position kids? How does a teacher view these colors? So thinking about this color coding system, we would initially think that Isabella needs some help and there are gaps in her learning. Maybe she needs to be pulled out of class for additional intervention. What does Isabella see when she sees that color? So let me add some context here. These 3 students were given the problem that you see on the screen. Hazel and her brother frosted all of the cookies that their mom made for the party. Hazel decorated 56 cookies. Her brother decorated 81 cookies. How many cookies will there be? And so here's Diane's work. Diane has used place value. She decomposed 56 into 50 and 6, 81 into 80 and 1. We see evidence of place value understanding here, and in the way the units were then combined. 50 plus 80 equals 130, and 6 and 1 to 7. Combining like units here with place value will be critical later as she works with fractions and combines like terms in high school math. And now here is Isabella's work. Isabella has used place value like Diane. She started by operating on the tens. 50 plus 80 equals 130. Then she adds the 6 ones from the 56. Perhaps she's using an incrementing strategy, combining the tens, one of the ones, and forgetting the one from the 81. She doesn't include the one from the 81, getting to the sum of 136 rather than 137. Her answer is wrong. However, we know a lot about her thinking, and she knows a lot. So now let's look at Ayden's work. Ayden direct modeled. We see the 56 cookies represented, the 81 cookies represented, and the total of 137. He too solved the problem correctly, arrived at the correct answer, and made sense of the problem. Focusing on only a correct answer might lead a teacher to think he's got it, when actuality, some important learning still needs to take place. So from looking at the student work, we can see assets in all of the students' strategies. I can use what I learned from their thinking to position them as competent learners. In this example, Isabella has some great thinking which can benefit the other students in the class. Isabella relates to Diane's strategy, and as a teacher, I would facilitate a conversation around Diane's work. So for example, in my classroom, Isabella can explain to the class how Diane solved the problem, and I can anticipate Isabella revising her thinking in the middle of her analysis. As she is explaining Diane's work, she will discover that she didn't include the one from the number 81. She will revise her thinking and as a result feel competent, even though her answer was inaccurate. This opportunity for Isabella to discuss a familiar strategy gives her a sense of competence and aids in her social-emotional well-being. Her strategy and explanation of her strategy provides validation among her peers as well as herself. And then after Isabella makes a discovery, I shift to Ayden and ask him what he notices about Diane's notation. He immediately notices that there are numbers inside a square and the circle. I continue to facilitate and ask Isabella what numbers he's referring to. Sorry. What numbers he's... Once she responds 50 and 6 to make 56, I ask Ayden to circle the 56 in his representation. Since Ayden organized his work where he draws 56 circles above the line, he can make a connection between the 56 and Diane's work to his representation of 56. The student discourse has positioned each student as competent sense makers. So it's important to understand that this shift in thinking is part of a much bigger shift, as you might infer from John's opening. Had I been given these new assessments 5 years ago, the assessments would have been viewed as a new tool to be used in ways I formerly used district assessments, which is to sort kids, reteach, give grades. This work is one part of the much bigger way of thinking about teaching and learning. During this pandemic and thinking about learning loss, as a teacher, I'm purposeful in my instructional moves with these students, and I target what they know and build upon their learning versus focusing on what the students do not understand. This connects to the core practices of responsive teaching that John introduced earlier in this presentation. The student discourse between Isabella and Ayden is an example of orienting students to each other's ideas, as well as positioning students competently. So now I'm going to turn it to Shelley, and she's going to talk about the classroom environment that's been critical in rehumanizing math, along with the opportunities we have to impact the identity of the students we work with.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley Myman, and I'm a third grade teacher in the district, and happy to be here with you tonight. So these are some classroom learning norms that some of us use as a result of our work. These norms have been adapted from the work of Elham Kazemi and Allison Hintz in the book Intentional Talk, which we were introduced to and we're really enjoying. And these norms are even more crucial during this past year as students have experienced long periods of social isolation, and then they had to come back and adjust to new protocols at school, such as social distancing and mask wearing, which can hinder their interaction. So we introduce these norms to our students, and we refer to them constantly in order to build a classroom culture that supports all students to feel valued and safe and take risks and share ideas, and we find them really helpful. We point out every opportunity to practice these norms through all subjects, and once our students begin to internalize them, they're referring to them often, and they make comments about them, and their favorite one is, "I'd like to revise my thinking." We really enjoy when they do that. And as an example of how these norms support student agency, identity, and learning, I want to tell you about a specific girl named Chloe that we had in third grade who just particularly embodied all of these ideas, and she's kind of our poster child for how we want them to take up these norms. She participated in classroom mathematical discussions, and as the class would discuss a problem and share their answers and strategies, Chloe would listen carefully to her students and consider their thinking and compare her ideas to theirs. And sometimes she would respectfully disagree, even when she was the only student doing so, which we find really powerful because a lot of times, they would just want to go along with what everyone else is saying, but she would really think for herself. Even when she was the only one having a different answer, she would take ownership of those ideas and defend them, and she would continue listening to others until maybe she would be truly convinced to change her mind. So she would hold on to her idea and not just agree with her classmates until she really, truly understood it in a different way and changed her mind. And then she was able to explain why she had revised her thinking. So next we're going to look at a math problem from both a teacher perspective and a student perspective. So this problem involves 5 groups of 24. I want you to just notice those numbers in the problem. This problem was given to our third graders after they had been working with problems involving ideas like 5 groups of 4. We wanted to see what they would do with the number 24. So we intentionally selected 5 groups of 24 to see what we could learn about their thinking. How would they think about the number 34? Would they notice that it was close to 25 and think about 5 groups of 25? Or would they use the distributive property and think about 5 times 20 and 5 times 4? Or would they see 20 as 2 tens? So I want you to go ahead and just think about how would you solve that problem in your mind or on a piece of paper really quickly. I'll give you a moment to do that. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at a 3rd grade student named Michelle who is going to solve this problem. And as you're watching her solve this problem, pay attention to the details of her strategy and think about what does she know and understand. And then we'll discuss it after.
All right, here we go. You can read this one. Read the problem at the top.
The teacher has 5 boxes of crayons. Each box has 24 crayons. How many crayons does the teacher have in all? I think I could get this one.
Okay. So what's your answer?
120.
Okay. So I think I saw mostly what you did there. How did you, so I see you had like the 4 and 4 is 8 and the 4 and 4 is 8 there. Can you show me where that is on your paper?
So the 4 and the 4 is right here.
Yeah. So then how did you figure out how much all that was? Well, I know that you had 100 from over on that other side, but how did you get to that 20? What'd you do?
Well, I just got 20 and 20 equals 40.
Uh-huh.
Because 2 plus 2 equals 4. So in the tens, it would equal 40.
Okay.
So 20 plus 20 equals 40, and then 20 plus 20 equals 40. So that would equal 80. And if I added the extra 20, that would be a 60. So when I added so it's 40, so 40 plus 60 plus 40 equaled 100.
Yeah.
And since I had the 4s, I just add 4 plus 4 equals 8. And 4 plus 4 equals 8, so that would be equal 16. And the 16 plus 4 equals 20.
Got it. Got it. Nice job.
So here's Michelle's work for you to take a look at. And thinking about assessment as part of the work of teaching, we can take a look at her work and think about what understandings are evident in her strategy. So some of the things that we noticed are she understands the context of the problem. We can see the boxes of crayons, and we can see the crayons in the 524s that she's adding there. We can see that she's understanding the relationship of multiplication and addition, that 5 groups of 24 is the same as adding 524s. We can see her flexibility with numbers and her understanding of place value as she decomposes the 24 into 20 and 4, and then recomposes combining the 10s and then the 1s, 20 plus 20 to 40, and 4 plus 4 to 8. We can see her strategy is based on place value and properties of operations. She's also able to communicate her thinking within her representation. Obviously, we can't sit next to each student and interview them like that, so we encourage our students, of course, to make their thinking evident on the paper, and she's also able to do that verbally. So Michelle's work shows at least partial understanding of these standards that build up to a conceptual foundation for the standard at the top, which is a 5th grade standard. And all of the bulleted standards are 3rd grade standards, except for the last one, which is 4th. So she's building some really strong foundation for being able to use that standard algorithm in 5th grade by the work that she's doing right now in 3rd. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague and partner, Christina, and it's her birthday today. And she's going to talk about some of the things that we do as part of our daily work.
Thanks, Shelley. My name is Christina Selstad. I'm also a teacher in the Newport-Mesa Unified School District, and I teach 3rd grade as well. And thank you so much for joining us for something that all of us are very passionate about. We're excited to share it with you. So on a daily basis, we look at students' work, such as Michelle's, and we collaborate and analyze our students' work to see what they already understand and what might be next steps. We ask ourselves a series of questions, such as, what do we want students to understand and consider a learning experience to get them there? What problem will we pose next? Which numbers can we put in the problem to get at a specific mathematical idea? Which strategies will we share with the class and who will share them? Another question we ask ourselves is, how might we pair students to collaborate around something they're working on and can learn from each other? We also think about helping students mold their mathematical identity. We look to bring out the math that a student knows, even if it is only a partial understanding. Maybe a student accurately represented a problem, but wasn't sure how to count it. We will have that student share his or her picture, and then we might count it together as a class. Here's an example of some of the frequent monitoring that we do to keep track of what students are understanding to guide our instruction. In this example, you'll notice that the students understood 4th, but they struggled more with 8th. We clearly see that this group of students are ready to move on from 4th, but still need to continue working on their understanding of 8th. So now we can develop some activities around that to help them. Here's what the data from our instructional materials looked like. In the past, we got this kind of information at the item level. And we thought, what are we supposed to do with this? I can tell you what we did with it. We moved on feeling like we failed. We justified our poor results saying things like, oh, I have the SAI cluster this year, and we moved on to the next unit. Students were cheated out of the learning opportunities to build upon what they do know and develop critical understanding because the pacing plan told us to move on. Think back to the previous slide shared of Isabella and Ayden. Isabella would have been in this red group, but she has a more developed understanding. Ayden would appear in the green group, but the green doesn't show me that Ayden still has a lot of understandings to take place. Now imagine the students receiving a test percentage back at the top of their test. Isabella would have developed some negative feelings about herself as a mathematician. Maybe she would even give up on math. Earlier in the year, as we were still learning on Zoom, my students solved 2 groups of 8, or 2 times 8, and then they were asked to solve 4 groups of 8. I asked them to use 2 times 8 to help them solve 4 times 8. Then they were supposed to send me a chat with the answer. Sophia sent me 32 and 40 with a question mark. She knew it was one of the 2, but wasn't sure which one was correct. I asked if she would mind talking through her thinking with the rest of the class. As she did, I saw the light bulb click. She confidently told us it was 32 and was able to explain why. She was beaming. If she had seen a score on her problem, she might have had a circle around it or missed it. But instead, she walked away from class that day, knowing that she's a competent mathematician. Would a percentage at the top of a paper or test have helped these students? Do students really need to see a percentage at the top of a test at a young age or at any age? Let's take a look at one of the revised assessments to then talk about how we've changed the data we have and how we look at that data. So take a moment just to look at these problems and think about the student thinking that could be elicited. So I want to share how we look at this data now. We went from the bar graph to using this new representation of data. We no longer give a percentage on their tests. Instead, we capture student thinking on this data sheet. As you look at the sheet, think about the things that you notice and think about how you might imagine yourself using this as a teacher. We use this to plan our next steps. This data sheet doesn't seem final, like a percentage at the top of a test, but more like a snapshot of where students are in their learning journey. We no longer move on to the next chapter. It's like a learning continuum. Within the Math Fellows learning community, we analyze data and plan next instructional steps intentionally based on the data and our knowledge of our students. It allows us to see beyond whether a student got the answer right or wrong. We no longer see who is struggling and try to send them off to an intervention group during our math time. Instead, it allows us to ask, how can I support all students today and tomorrow? We now see this as being a tool for us. It's no longer about being compliant and sending our scores into the district. It's about how we can use the information to support student learning now. The students hear the celebrations of successes rather than feeling like a failure from a percentage. Now, let's think about, what do teachers always wish for? More than ever, we wish for more time. Our class times have been cut significantly because of COVID. Every minute counts. We have to be so intentional about spending the little time we have on the major work of the grade level. It used to take 4 days to give our formal math assessments. We would spend 2 days reviewing and 2 days testing, hoping and praying that our bar graph would show mostly green. Now we spend 1 day assessing each unit. We were previously spending 28 days between reviewing and assessing. Now we spend 7 days a year on formal math assessments. We've gained a whole month of instructional time, and we know our kids so much more than a percentage. The shift in the way we have used assessments has taken the pressure off of getting our students to perform and has given us the freedom to teach in a much more meaningful way. Now we just teach math and let the students guide our instruction. Each day brings new lessons full of intentionality, purpose, and math. So what have we gained from all of this? The enthusiasm for math is contagious. Last year I had a boy named Danny in my class, and Danny came to me with no interest in math. He would stare at the ceiling when it was math time and just seemed to check out. I started noticing that Danny was becoming a little bit more interested in math each day, and one day his previous teacher came up to me to share the conversation she had just had with him at recess. Danny ran up to her and was so excited to tell her about all of the math he was learning. She was so happy that he had gained all of this math knowledge and that his excitement had grown for math. Danny became more and more involved in all of our mathematical discussions the rest of the year. He raised his hand every time I asked questions. He listened to others to understand their ideas and would say, "I respectfully disagree," when he didn't agree with him. He brought our learning norms to life that Shelley shared with you earlier. How would things have been different for Danny if I had continued just passing back the math test with a failing grade at the top? Might have taken him much longer to find a love for math, or he might never have discovered it. The students blow me away with the conversations they have in our classroom. Even with the face masks and social distancing, I am still so impressed with their discussions. Imagine if they continue building the way they have conversations with each other. think about adults and the rest of our world having conversations where it's okay to respectfully disagree or agree with each other. We as teachers have gained so much more knowledge about a student's understanding by analyzing their work. I go to SST meetings for students and truly feel comfortable sharing what a child understands and doesn't understand, instead of just telling them his or her test scores. We feel like we have permission to do what's best for our students because we don't have to follow a strict pacing guide. We have the ability to spend more time where it's needed. Our teaching has transformed because our leadership has joined us side by side on this journey. John, who is with us tonight, has co-taught lessons in our classroom. He's spent time listening to our students. He's listened to our thoughts at meetings where he is seeking to make meaningful changes. He sees the benefits of the revised assessments because he has chosen to be fully engaged and involved himself in the process. He's broken the mold of district leadership by putting himself in our shoes and learning with us. We are grateful for the path he has allowed us to take. The success story of Danny is his story too, because he's allowed to change. Before I pass it back to John to close us out, I want you to take a moment to consider the question on this next slide. What is something you heard today that you want to think more about? And please go ahead and use the chat to reply. I see a lot of great responses in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas. I'll go ahead and pass it back over to John now.
Thank you, Christina. I can't tell you how lucky I feel to be able to work with educators like those that you just heard from. They're truly amazing and taking lots of risks and reaping the benefits from that. They're not alone in our district. As you can see here in these images, a few of our images of a few of our teachers and how they're humanizing mathematics, making visible with the work that they have in their hands, their systems for listening to and keeping track of student thinking and using that to inform their instruction. As you can see, this work is happening in classrooms throughout the district, but it's not in every classroom yet. Our goal is to have this type of thinking and teaching throughout the entire district in every classroom. Because if I think of my three children, and if they were still in kinder through fifth grade classrooms, I'd want them in a classroom that builds their love of learning by positioning them competently in a community of learners. And if I want this for my kids, I want it for all kids. So in our work to this point, we've learned how critical it is to have a coherent system where district-wide professional learning is supported and connected to learning happening regularly at school sites. Adults learn through collaboration centered in student thinking and sense-making. Learning and collaboration and students are at the center of all our work. And as you can see from this graphic, our intent, we're not there yet, but our intent is to have everyone involved thinking and learning in connected ways and part of the work. Again, when I think of my own 3 children in a system like this, I realize they would reap the benefits of every adult and child in this system when we're all learning together. So our work isn't finished. It continues to provide us opportunities to examine what we're currently doing, learn from it, and make adjustments. So each student in front of us is positioned as a competent sense maker throughout the entirety of every school day. We can only do this if we're willing to examine our systems, some of which you see on this slide. So what does it look like to examine systems we are all part of? It looks like redefining assessment data that supports making instructional decisions based on what students know and understand, and positions them as competent sense makers and contributors in a community of learners. What does it sound like? I'll give you a few minutes to read this quote. It sounds like a teacher who knows her students beyond a right or wrong answer. Sounds like a teacher who's guided by the thinking of the students in her classroom. It sounds like this teacher who has the freedom to make instructional decisions based on all of her content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, knowledge of student thinking, and most important, knowledge of each student as individual learners. So why must we examine systems we're part of? We must examine our systems to support the identities of strong, confident, happy, relentless learners who love to learn because they're listened to by a community who seeks to understand what they know in order to learn with and from them. Thank you for sharing this time with us tonight and learning alongside. Really an honor to be here and happy to open it up for questions, Jane.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you so much to the whole team for such a great webinar. We don't usually do 90 minutes of webinars, but that just held my attention the whole time, and just really great work that you all are leading in Newport-Mesa. I have a couple of questions that I pulled out, one from the group chat and one from the Q&A. But if anybody has additional questions, we just have a few minutes left, and so we have some time for questions, which is exciting. Go ahead and put them in the group chat or the Q&A, and I'll sort of filter them and ask questions as they come. But there was a few people who asked questions about grades and grading, so I think I'll ask this question to one or more than one of the teachers that was with us tonight. So the question that I pulled is, do you use these assessments for grading since you're not assigning a score, or do you use something else, something different for grades? So if one or more of the teachers could respond to that, that would be great.
Well, I will try. This is Shelley. It's difficult. We do still have to give grades, and not putting a percentage on, on top of a test has changed our way of thinking about what kind of grades to give. We're still struggling in that area, and maybe, I don't know if John wants to add anything to it. We've been discussing it a lot. We try to look at the overall picture of kind of the progression of that child in that particular standard and make a judgment call of how close they are to mastering that standard, but not looking at it from that lens of just a number, looking at more of the overall picture of what that child is doing in that area, if that helps.
Yeah, and I think I would add a little. Go ahead, Christina.
I was just going to add to that. I agree with what Shelley said. It is a little bit difficult, but at the same time, it's where did they end up at the end of the trimester? Do they have the understandings by the end of the trimester? So it's not about averaging grades or even giving grades on any of the assessments, but it's really, they had their starting point, their ending point. We don't really need to look at all of that as we're doing the report cards. We really need to see, do they get it today, and assess it from there.
I think I would add just a few more points to this. We talk about the need to kind of relook at our systems. Our grading system, again, is probably something else we need to look at and possibly rework, and we continue to need to have conversations around that because it's not perfect. But I would also add that along with, say, this assessment, remember this assessment is a point in time. And what we're talking about is assessing, within the work of teaching on a regular daily basis, because we're constantly thinking about where our students' knowledge is, as you heard Shelley talk about on the continuum of learning at their grade level. So to say that we're using this assessment to give a grade, I think our focus is becoming more along the lines of using assessment to inform what we know about our kids, and then making instructional decisions based off of that. But again, another system that we need to look at and have conversation about and learn from to make adjustments.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Jody, maybe this next question is for you, and maybe you and John, but there were several people that mentioned questions related to the professional learning. So one specific question is, the model you describe of professional learning is amazing, and I'd love to know more about how the teacher capacity was developed to get to that point of reflecting on instruction based on student understanding. And I thought maybe there's a future blog post you're going to write that will address some of this, and you could maybe give a preview of that as well.
Absolutely. So as we mentioned, and as some of the teachers have told us through this work, or even I think Michelle said it today, if I had this assessment 5 years ago, I wouldn't have used it in these ways. So professional learning has been a big part of this, and we've all been working together now for 3 years, and really spending time noticing the details of student thinking. And this year in particular, we've been spending a lot of time, and we have this data now. What does this mean? And really trying to think about, if you're going from kind of a fixed planning idea where we followed a book or followed a pacing guide, it's really challenging to think, okay, this is what I'm seeing, but what do I do about it? So I think that's kind of the goal of our work this year through the Fellows group. And as Jenny mentioned, we have 2 more blogs coming, one on Friday and then 2 following, and we are going to be talking about the professional learning. One of the blogs will be directly centered on that. And I'm not sure if Christina, Shelley, Michelle, John, any of you want to add to this, because we've all been part of the learning. We've all been learning together.
Yes, if I can
would like to
add.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, sorry. I would like to... This part of collaboration and the professional learning has really impacted my current teaching, only because I get to hear different perspectives from my colleagues when looking at student data. And I know my students, like, on a personal level in the class, in the class, and knowing what they can do, but just having an outside view and talking to my colleagues and being part of this community, it really helps everybody, all my students, as well as myself as an educator, help me grow. So it's vital.
Yeah, I was just going to add that this professional development for me has been so powerful because we've learned together, literally, as John and Jody have said several times. They're learning with us. They're not, bringing in some expert to say, here's what you should do. They're sitting down in our classrooms with us next to our students and listening to them and wondering about, what are they going to do with this problem? Or they're putting themselves on our level and really enjoying working with the kids with us. And that's something in my career that I've never experienced before. So it's really cool.
Great, thank you. I was just looking at, we have maybe time for one more question. There was some questions about time, related to various parts of the system, maybe time for analysis, time for looking more deeply at student work, and if the teachers have any reflection on that, that would be great to share. And then also just maybe John, you could start actually, and then we could move to the teachers and they could talk about time. But there was also questions around time for the training, for teacher training. So since we just talked about professional learning, maybe John, you could talk about creating time and space for that. And then if the teachers after that would respond to the question around, how they manage the additional time it takes to do that level of student analysis.
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of another layer to this is in relation to time that we're thinking about is how do we do all of this work in professional learning within the day of teaching, because it is a lot. So I don't want to sugarcoat that. CGI, going back to that time in training, that was a significant commitment on the district's part for those teachers who wanted to participate, because there's a 2-year commitment of 6 full days a year. The pandemic has put a little bit of a postponement on that because subs are at a premium these days. But it did involve releasing teachers from their classrooms for a significant amount of time. In the same sense, our fellows work added some additional time out of the classroom, but there's also has been a commitment on both the district's part and the teachers' part to do some of this work in chunks after school. And we're kind of looking at all of those pieces. It's got to be a priority when we're talking about really changing the culture of teaching and learning. We've got to find the time and get creative with that. And it's a difficult thing to do, but the commitment has been there at this point to do what we can to support, the teachers, to have the time to sit down and focus their learning, with each other and together. So I would say that is it. We've got lots of work to do still, and that will continue to be a challenge for us. And Shelley, Christina,
Great.
Michelle.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
I do want to highlight what John said about priority. As a teacher, it is, we do spend a lot of time after school with some trainings. However, it is, like I said before, the community of learners with my colleagues is leaps and bounds of what is happening in it's a straight effect of what's happening in my classroom. I'm able to collaborate and hear and have my colleagues help me to look at my student data, and I would just say it makes my teaching more effective with having this professional development with others.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and just thank our guests and then wrap us up. But I've been lucky enough to work with John and Jody and a couple of the teachers that joined us tonight and have seen them in action. And we just are really fortunate to be able to learn from all of you. And I'm looking forward to reading your future blog posts and continuing this conversation and continuing in this learning community because the work you're doing around assessment is so important and critical right now, especially at this time in our country right now and the challenges we're facing. It's just really important that we are humanizing assessment and positioning students to look at their strengths and come at it from an asset-based lens. So we hope that you will join our network and that those of you that joined this webinar tonight and appreciated the content and the learning. We have a national network of educators. We connect with them just like we've connected with John and Jody and the Newport-Mesa team to learn together and do work together. And we certainly have a lot of opportunities for professional learning and engagement opportunities like this. So if you're interested, you can join our network by going to our achievethecore.org/CA-sign-up, or there's other ways to engage with us as well on Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest. So definitely consider continuing the assessment conversation after this webinar and in the future. And this is maybe a little bit hard to see, but we have a new feature on our website on Achieve the Core. At the very top on the left-hand side, if you go to achievethecore.org, there's a button that says Events, and that will take you to an event calendar. And this happens to be December, but you can see January and February, and we're going to be in the process in the next week or so of loading on a variety of professional learning opportunities, webinars, coffee and conversations, even a seminar series that's going to kick off in March. And so you can see the title of each of those on the day that they happen. And if you click on them, you'll see more details. And in the where, there's always a registration link so you can register for the opportunities. So this is a great way to stay informed about our upcoming learning opportunities like this webinar. And with that, I'm going to sign us off and just say thank you so much to everybody who joined us tonight. There was such great conversation in the group chat and engagement throughout the webinar, and we just really appreciate you being here on an evening after, for most of you, a long day of teaching or leading in school districts. So thank you for being here. Thank you to our guests again, and we look forward to seeing you at a future webinar.